So hi guys, my name is Omer Kaplan. I'm one of the founders and the CMO of Iron Source. And we're going to speak about China today. But first I want to teach you one thing about Israel. But I was here about a year ago. I think it was a very, very similar date. And we had a different presentation about how Israel turned from startup nation into scale-up nation, right? A fascinating story. And then this is a very big hall. Right? By the way, one of the nicest halls in Israel. So it's a very big hall, and it has, the crowd there was actually smaller than today. And before I spoke there, I didn't know if we're going to pull what we're calling in Hebrew, the summer of Avia, okay? In Hebrew, by the way, there is a famous movie about a little girl that is doing a birthday party, and nobody shows up. And ever since then, there is a saying in Israel that in Hebrew that if you're having a party or an event and nobody shows up, that's the summer of Avia, and nobody want to pull the summer of Avia. So thank you for being here. It's really great to speak today in Casual Connect Tel Aviv. So China, by the way, I think the original title was How China is Changing the Mobile Advertising Landscape, and then our sometime over-sophisticated head of communication changed into, I think it was mapping the Silk Road or something like that. But then we decided to go with the Israeli chutzpah version of making it in China, right? And I'm going to cut to the end of the presentation. The answer is that we don't know how to, but we're going to try and at least share how we analyze the market and what we are doing there today. So what do you think that you're seeing here? I think that this is one of the best examples to emphasize the difference between China and everywhere else on the face of the planet, right? So what you're seeing here is a very surprising picture. You're seeing an allegedly happy Chinese person, right? This falls over. An allegedly happy Chinese person, but she's looking at red results from the Chinese stock market exchange. Anybody here knows why? Why is she happy? What? She shorted the stock, said the legendary Tomer Bar-Zeev, and what do you say? Yes, so it's a slightly different answer. In China, red is actually good luck, okay? And red is a good sign, so red means actually that the stocks are going up. So she is very happy because this was probably one of the best days in the history of the Chinese market because everything here is red, right? And this is an amazing example of how different China is and everywhere else, and how they'll always do it their way, and you have no choice but to adjust if you want to work with Chinese partners. So when we are speaking about China, one of the main, and again, it's China within the framework of mobile advertising, right? The mobile app ecosystem. We are dividing China to China in and China out. China in means promoting or monetizing Chinese users. So finding the most relevant users to offer to Chinese users or helping Chinese developers monetize their local users. This is China in. And China out means working with Chinese partners, usually very big ones, who are already very dominant in China and are now looking for ways to expand globally. Right? They want to increase their market share, they want to enter new countries, and this is what we are calling China out. It's helping Chinese partners either distribute or monetize their global users. By the way, the sensors here are terrible. So let's start with China in and discuss what is the China in challenge and opportunity, right? So let's start with the challenges. So I think the easiest way to describe the challenges in working with China in is to understand that China is a parallel universe, right? So while everything may look the same, it's actually not, right? So instead of Google, right? So Google doesn't really work at China. You have Baidu. Instead of, by the way, ICQ, I don't know how many of you know that Tencent, right, which is one of the biggest Chinese companies and maybe in the world, internet companies in the world, it was actually completely inspired by Israel's own ICQ, right? So Tencent's first product was QQ, and I think, I may be wrong, the original name was actually IICQ. Before it was QQ, it was an exact copy or something very similar, or let's say it politely, inspired by ICQ. and this was actually, it's still a very, very popular application, even more popular than WeChat, which is obviously Tencent #1 mobile application, and the entire Tencent giant was inspired by Israel ICQ, and we're going to speak briefly about Uber and Didi, right? But it's not Uber there, it's Didi controlling the market, eBay versus Alibaba, Twitter versus Weibo. All of these companies tried to enter the China market, but the China in market is very, very complicated, and you'll see that there are many, many various ways of how you can fail in China in if you're not doing it in the right way. So let's speak about a few challenges. The first one is localization is very hard, right? So when we say localization, right, we don't necessarily mean translating, because even though the translating to Chinese, it's very, very difficult, localization to Chinese is actually localizing something to a completely parallel universe. So just a very random example, this is a normally designed Chinese website, right? So for the sensitive Jewish eye, this would look probably like a mess, but this is how Chinese read information, right? And this is just one example out of so many examples of what does it take to really localize a product into being really adjusted or fit the Chinese market. The second challenge, especially when we're speaking about the mobile app ecosystem, right? So when we are speaking about the Western world, we primarily have two app stores that we are dealing with, right? One is obviously the Google App Store, and the other one is the Apple App Store. But when we are dealing with China, there are, in general, many, many sandboxes. And just so you'll see, there are more than 200 total Android app stores in China, okay? Now, what's more surprising is that Google, right, that the Google Play is only 4% out of these 200 app stores. Right? So if I'm a Chinese developer, if I'm a Western developer who want to create an app to the Chinese market, I need to understand how to work with 200 different app stores. This is borderline impossible unless I know the right people and have the right connections. And this is a huge, huge challenge when you want to go China in with your mobile advertising. And I think that a very good example of China in challenges are maybe to share a few cautionary tales about some of these internet giants and how they tried and didn't necessarily succeed in China. And the first one was eBay versus Alibaba, right? So what eBay did is eBay decided to go all in for China in, right? And they spent hundreds of millions of advertising on the internet. They took a German manager and an American CTO to lead the China operation. They stuck to its global platform with listing charges and a relatively complex auction model, and they spend a lot of money on buying web users, right? Web users, unlike mobile. And if you're looking at Taobao, they mainly spent on TV, target for SMBs who were less internet savvy. They were 100% locally staffed. It was very free and easy to use, and when they went over their mobile acquisition, it was almost only mobile. And there is a very clear lesson from this case study, which is any China-in strategy must be completely localized, right? So even if you're thinking you're localizing the product, and you're thinking that you have the right people and you've translated everything, you need to be a China-in or have the right Chinese partner to understand how to really reach and interact with the Chinese users. And this is a very good example for it. My favorite example is actually something which is relatively new, right? Which is the Uber-Didi fight. And what's interesting about Uber-Didi is that nobody needs to say anything about Uber and their plan to dominate the world, right? So Uber are one of probably the highest valued private company today, and they decided to go all in on China, and they literally spent billions of dollars to enter the Chinese market, right? And I think that the majority of their losses were actually driven by how much they spent to gain Chinese market share. And on the other hand, you had two companies in China. You had Didi and Kuaidi, which were the leading players in China. And when they merged, it was really a bloodbath between Uber and the merged Didi company. And very, very recently, like a few months ago, Uber took a very, I think, brave decision, which was to merge or to sell their Chinese operation to Didi. They received 20% from the Didi business, and Didi also invested $1 billion into Uber, right? So they really created an alignment of interest, but this is a very good example for a company that even though they said they were all in, right, and it's Uber, right, it doesn't get bigger than Uber, and they got to a point where they said, we're not going to win the local fight, let's focus where we can win, and they did this merger, and the lesson here was that massive capital doesn't necessarily equals guaranteed success, right? And what they did is they said, if we can't beat them, join them, and I think that long term, this was a brilliant move by Uber. So we now understand why China in is very difficult, right? But let's say why it's still one of the most lucrative, interesting, fascinating markets that almost every company at the right point with the right strategy should enter. So when we are looking at the golden opportunity in China so China has today 563 million smartphone users, right? It's about 28% of the global smartphone users market. Right? Mobile ad spend in 2016 was $27.5 billion, which is worth 30% of the global mobile ad spend in 2016. And the most mind-blowing data is that China is now #1 in the world for iOS revenues as of literally now, as of Q3 2016, and it's the first in the world for global gaming revenue, and I'm telling you, they're just warming up, right? So it's very, very hard, very challenging, but it's a mind-blowing, epic opportunity that if you're doing it with the right strategy, you have no choice but to go there, and the upside can be amazing. So let's speak about China out. So when we said China out, again, it's working with usually very big Chinese partners looking for overseas distribution, right? So it usually are the biggest internet players, the Baidu, the Alibaba, the Tencent, who are very big in China, and now they're looking to expand globally, right? They want to build their market share in other countries, and they need to find the relevant partners. And here is where we've identified this opportunity a few years ago, and I'll show you it wasn't just iron source. This is a very China-Israel opportunity, and we're going to discuss it in a second. So what are the challenges? And just to emphasize how strong it is, this is a quote by Alibaba's CEO, and he's saying, we must absolutely globalize. We will organize a global team and adopt global thinking to manage the business and achieve the goal of global buy and global sell. And there isn't one CEO, chairman, whatever leading person in these companies who doesn't think about how can they expand globally. And I'm telling you, these companies are truly amazing, right? They're an inspiration to all of us. It's not always easy for them to succeed globally, right? So what they need is they need to find the right partner to help them with their China out strategy. So let's speak about the China out opportunity and what does it mean, right? How do you help Chinese companies get out of China? So first of all, you're working with giants, right? This is something which is very important to understand. If a Chinese company is at the point that they want to go China out, right? It means that the entire China, which is huge, right? If they already want to expand globally, they are necessarily a giant. So it means that you're working with giants. It's a mutual relationship, right? So with the mobile landscape, it's usually supply and demand. What will happen is that they will start with demand. They would go and they would try to acquire users wherever they decide globally, but then they would need to somehow monetize them. So it's a co-sided advertising monetization or distribution monetization ecosystem. And then it's always long-term growth because these are companies that when they start, they usually play very, very long-term and will increase their countries and market share. And you need to be ready for the long cycles of working with them. So what does it take, right? So it sounds like a very good opportunity. It's obviously a lot of money. So what does it take? How can an advertising or a distribution or even a big publisher, right, a big developer, how can we work with Chinese companies if we want to somehow tap into the China out opportunity? So first of all, you really need to have true global reach. So true global reach means that either you're a big publisher or a developer or you're a big advertising company, you need to be truly global. right? Because Baidu can decide tomorrow morning that they want to have market share in the Philippines, and Tencent can decide that they want to go for Indonesia, and Chiu can decide that Brazil is their next target, right? They want to work with one partner who can very, very quickly give them the scale they need in basically any country that they think of. So being truly global is a key element to succeed with China out partners. Bless you. The second one is you need to have China-grade scale. Right? China-grade scale means that these companies don't want to work with players who can give them 1,000 installs a day, 10,000 installs a day, and sometimes not even 100,000 installs a day. They want to work with players who really have China-grade scale and can make a difference. Because if I am Baidu, I will say in 2 quarters I want to have 10% of the market in Indonesia, and I need a player that can help me achieve that. So China-grade scale is another key element. The next one is, and this is one of my favorites, is you need to know how to bridge the East and the West. Right? So this is by itself at least a 2-day presentation. If you want, we can reschedule. But bridging the East and the West is something which is, first of all, very complicated, can be very, very tricky, and is almost an art, because things are different. Right? US companies and Chinese companies, they both are for-profit organizations, so eventually they want to maximize their profits, but culturally and the way they operate, it couldn't be more different. Right? So when you're bridging the East and the West, you need to understand everything, and it's something that it takes a lot of time to learn, and you want to try and minimize your mistakes during the path. And then maybe a few words about our journey in China, and then I'm going to go back to speaking in general and not too much about ironSource specifically. So our journey in China is actually very special. We've, about 3.5 years ago, we've opened our Chinese office in Beijing. Right, we have today about 35 employees. It's 30 in China and then 5 more in APAC. Right, so 35 employees. Most of them are in Beijing, by the way, a great city, crazy polluted. Right, so if you've been to Beijing, it's very, very challenging on the pollution side, but culturally, it's really one of the most fascinating cities. So our office is in Beijing, and a couple of smaller offices in Shanghai and Shenzhen. And China is a big deal in ironSource. It's about 20% of the company revenues today, primarily China out. Right? So primarily working with Chinese companies and helping them to globally distribute and monetize. But about 6 months ago, we've for the first time decided that we're confident enough to start working on our China in business. So we found the relevant Chinese partners, and we've launched our China in operation, which is so far scaling nicely, but still at the beginning of the path. But our strategic decision was first China out, and only then, once we understood the market enough, go China in. By the way, we have 3 Chinese investors, which is always very helpful, CVC, Ping An, and SAIF partners. But again, Israel and China, it's way bigger than ironSource. Right? What we are seeing very, very strongly is what we're calling the Israel-China love affair. And there are a few core reasons why Israel and China today are a match made in heaven. Right? And by the way, we are literally, and I'm sure that many of our Israeli colleagues here, we are seeing Chinese delegations coming to our offices and to Israel on a weekly basis. Right? So it's really amazing how interesting the Israeli market is to Chinese companies, and we think that there are a few core reasons. The first one is local first, global first. Right? So if I'm an Israeli company and I have a new product, I will almost always be global first. Why? Because Israel is amazing but very small. Right? So if I'll create a product for Israel, the scale would be very, very limited. So most Israeli companies, and we have enough chutzpah, from day one, we're going globally. Right? So whatever technologies we develop, whatever mindset, it's always a global mindset. When I'm a Chinese company, I have the biggest market in the world at my feet, basically. So I will always go local first, but then if I'm big enough, I start thinking global. And the connection here between Chinese companies going local first and Israeli companies going global first, that's an amazing connection that creates today more synergies than we are all aware of, and I think is going to really significantly grow in the next few years. The second reason why it works is mutual cultural respect and similarities. Now, this is, if I wasn't a fairly cynical guy, I would say that this is very, very, very moving. But when you are in China and you're seeing how much they respect and love Israelis and the Jewish culture, it's really amazing to see, and they want us to succeed. Culturally, they love us. They want to work with Israelis. They believe in us. They think that we are very smart and innovative. And there is a very interesting fit between the cultures. And also, there is a word in Hebrew. I'll just teach you one more word in Hebrew. There's a word in Hebrew called dugri, which means being straightforward, right? The Chinese are very straightforward. They'll usually tell you what they think. It can be a very quick no or very quick yes. And I think that Israelis are kind of the same. Right? So after the meeting, you have no doubt how was the meeting. When you're finishing a meeting in the United States, as an Israeli, you may think it was amazing. Well, actually, it was very bad. Right? So it's a very, very relevant similarity which helps us to communicate in meetings or whatever corporations. And then the last reason why it works is that it's a very, we spoke about bridging the East and the West, right? We are geographically, right? Israel is sitting at a very convenient place between China and the West Coast, and time zone, right, makes it much, much easier, right? It's 5 hours forward to speak with China and 7 or 10 hours backwards to speak with the United States. And if you think about it, if I am in China and if I'm in San Francisco, I have about 60 minutes potentially that I can speak during a day, which makes communication borderline impossible. So even geographically, we have an advantage here. So to summarize, right, and then questions if you have. What are the kind of checklists that we recommend for companies that want to make it in China, right? So A, seriously, we don't really know, right? We've been working in China for about 3 years, something like that, slightly less. We are learning every day, but more that we are learning, we're actually surprised every day, right? So it's a constantly changing, very culturally different world, and you need to first understand that you don't know, and it's okay as long as you can admit it, right? So you don't know, and you constantly learn. The second part, the second tip or checklist is, and this is a really important one, the right Chinese partners can help, right? So I don't know, and obviously I wasn't there, but when companies like eBay or Google or other big players, when they decided to go to China, they may have thought that they are so amazing globally that they don't need the right Chinese partners, but this is a key to succeed in China, finding the right Chinese partners that can help. By the way, us having 3 Chinese investors were a tremendous help, and because we want to go China in, we're going to probably work with more partners. It's very, very important. It can save you. It can really shorten the learning curve, right? The learning curve is usually the hardest thing when going into a new countries or areas, and you want to shorten it. So this is a key element. The third tip is it's a long runway of time and money. So if you're still a relatively young startup, we would recommend maybe to wait a bit, right? Because it's going to probably take some time, and maybe you're not going to Uber lose, right? So you're not going to lose like Uber in billions of dollars of losses, but you're obviously going to lose in China before you're going to start being ROI positive, and you need to be prepared for it mentally and obviously financially, and then choose wisely whether you want to go China in or China out. So when we set and we strategize about our China activity, we identify what is our unique contribution, and it was the China out, being a truly global company, and we felt that our chances to succeed are much higher on the China out area. So we said, let's do China out first. Let's really learn it. It's been 3 years, and now we can go and do China in. So choose wisely where do you want to start. I can maybe just open a quick bracket and say, it was also the fact that Baidu called us and said, hey, help us with distributing our desktop products, and it was also a great way to start. So that was also how it happened to us, but this is very important on how to strategize your China in, China out wisely. So this is for the written part, and now any Q&A. You probably prepared one. Amazon, our favorite partner.
Thank you. Any questions for Omer?
Hi, good morning. Do you think it's possible to do business with China without being physically present in China?
Yeah. It's a good one. So I think it's possible, but at some point you're going to have a scale problem, right? So you can do business with China. You can even do a fairly big business in China. But if you really want to understand the nuances of working with Chinese partners, you need to have local office and local employees. And I'll share a story with you. You can go to a meeting, right? You'll sit with the CEO, the CMO, the CTO, whoever, right, on the management, and you'll have your Chinese employees, and you will speak, and everything would look very convincing. But then on the way to the elevator after the meeting, they would actually speak with your Chinese employees, and in a few sentences, will probably close all of the action items and actually the conclusions from the meeting, right? So it's you can do something, and you'll obviously progress, but the nuances and scale, you need to have some kind of a local presence, hopefully with very good local employees.
Wonderful. Hey, well, Omer, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your insight.
My pleasure.